Thank you so much, Ambassador Dr. Arikana Chihombori. The other one, Kuo. Am I right?
Quao.
Cool. Okay. Welcome to Live Chat with Josey. I am so super excited. I mean, you're one woman that I hold high esteem. I respect you so much. And thank you so much for coming to the show.
Thank you for having me. I am also very proud of all of you young people and all the wonderful work that you're doing to promote our Africa and to wake up us as a race. And it starts with you, our youth. So we have a responsibility to you to tell you like it is, so you can better understand your world, so you can do something about it.
Great. So it is culture here on Live Chat with Josey. Some people are lazy to read. I know about you thanks to Wikipedia, thanks to Google, but it is culture here for you to introduce yourself in the best way that you want to be addressed.
Well, let's see. My official title would be Excellency Ambassador Arikana Chihombori-Quao, MD, which stands for Medical Doctor, FAAFP, which stands for Fellow of the American Academy of Family Physicians. That is my complete title. HE Ambassador Arikana Chihombori-Quao.
You're a mother?
FAAFP. I'm a mother, a very proud mother of 5 children. I'm a proud Ghanaian wife. I am a Zimbabwean national by birth and a Ghanaian national by marriage. You know how us women are. We meet a boy and we lose our heads. So I am both a Zimbabwean and a Ghanaian, and I'm a medical doctor by profession. And then, of course, I became a diplomat, and now I just speak to issues pertaining to us Black people as a race. So I guess some people might call me an activist. I don't see it that way. I just see myself as a mother who is speaking on behalf of her children.
Okay, so take us through your career, your schooling. You went, which school did you go to? The other day we were discussing, and I was so happy when you told me that, Kuchivu, that's where I come from. I was like, oh, and I'm from Gutu, you know?
Right. No, we used to laugh at you guys, Mavitori. You were very stupid. We used to think everybody from Gutu and Mavitori, Kokoko, you were very stupid when we were growing up. So we used to have a lot of jokes about you people from Gutu. So we're not respectful. You're not very smart. But
why?
I don't know. Mavitori, you were very stupid. There were lots of jokes about Mavitori. So,
I know. Yeah, that is very true. My mom would always tease my dad.
But you know what, though? We're all very same people, because
so
we all go through to Chivu, and then we only bifurcate when we get to Chivu, and you'll go on to Gutu and to Gweru and all those places, and we go on to Sadza and Narira and all those other areas. But we're really not that far away from each other. But that's just society. I thought I might throw that in there. I went to school at Goromonzi, which again, we thought we were all that when we were going through school, because Goromonzi was the first co-ed school in Zimbabwe. And to go to Goromonzi, you had to have first division in all 6 subjects. And so not only did you have to have first division in all subjects, you also had to undergo a rigorous interview, a personal interview, once you were accepted. And then once you go through all that, then you were able to get into Goromonzi. So around the time I was growing up, those who went to Goromonzi were considered creme de la creme. And so we thought we were all that as well. But be it as it may, I went to Goromonzi High, which is about, I don't know, when you're growing up, when you're young, distances seem to be so long. I don't think Goromonzi, if the roads are okay, it's more than 45 minutes outside Harare. But when I was young, it was a journey, as we called the buses from city center to go to Goromonzi. And then from there, I came to the United States to go to college. I went to Fisk University, where I did my first degree in general chemistry and my master's in organic chemistry. And then from there, I went across the street to Meharry Medical College, where I completed my medical degree, and I did my first 3 years of residency in New York City in general surgery. I became a mother during that time, had 2 children, and who really didn't know me. So I decided to take off so I could go home and spend a year so my kids can know that I am their mother. But then while I was home, after 2 weeks of being home, I'm generally not one who can stay home and do nothing. I decided to check into the local, and home by that I meant back in Tennessee from New York. I decided to check into the local family medicine program, which I'd really planned to do just for 1 year and then continue on to finish the remaining 2 years of general surgery. But I really found myself in my element. I really did not understand what family medicine was all about. We just were not being pushed to be family physicians back in the 80s. It was almost as if you could not get into other programs, you ended up going into either family medicine or pediatrics or psychiatry. But I found that I was in my element. I was quite misinformed. Of course, family medicine was a new specialty, which had not been around for too long, so it was not known. But once I began to understand what family medicine was all about, it was really who I was. I was in my element. I was able to engage humanity. I feel like to a great extent I am who I am today because of the many experiences that I shared with my own patients. And I felt like I've experienced all of them. Family medicine helped me discover who I was. So instead of just being there for 1 year, I stayed and finished the 3-year residency program. So now I'm also a family physician. I'm a fellow of the American Academy of Family Physicians and practiced medicine for 25 years until I was called out of the blues to go and be the ambassador, African Union ambassador to the United States. So I moved from Tennessee to Washington, D.C. for what I thought was going to be a 6-month stint, because I didn't think I was going to be able to really make a difference. As a physician, we are rewarded on a daily basis, and if we are lucky, on good days, multiple times, where we actually see patients who are sick and we treat them, and either they're in the hospital, intensive care, and we finally discharge them. So we get a lot of highs all day long when we see people getting better. Of course, some days are not so good. We lose some. But by and large, we live very dynamic lives with continuously changing. You never have a time to be down in terms of your thinking capacity. We are always functioning at high levels because you can be called at any time and you have to be up and up at all times. So we're really generally, as physicians, we're high functioning people. And I could not see myself coming to be a diplomat and just really figure out how do I make that adjustment from living such a high functioning life? If you put the years of training, that's 30 years of medicine, to go from 30 years of high functioning life to a low pace, steady pace of a diplomat, where you have all the luxury of taking an issue and dealing with it, and maybe 2 years, 5 years, if you are lucky, you might get a resolution. That just wasn't me. It didn't seem like it was my cup of tea. So I came to Washington out of respect for the chair who appointed me, not really hoping that I really didn't think I'd make a difference in any way, shape, or form until I was in the inside and I began to see what was happening. And that's when, of course, I came to Washington with my doctor's hat. In anything that I do, I'm constantly making an assessment. What is the problem and what is the possible solution? And I began to see a lot of problems, and I began to formulate my own diagnosis of what I thought was going on. And then once I decided there were some problems, there were some issues, clear diagnosis that I had made, and I had clear plans that needed to be implemented, I made a decision at that time that I was going to hang around Washington a little bit longer and see what I could do to address what I felt were gross abuses of Black people that had been normalized and accepted as normal. But the bigger problem was that not only had the perpetrators normalized those abuses, we also, the Black people, had accepted and normalized those abuses. I diagnosed us Black people as suffering from what I would call the battered wife syndrome. where the battered woman no longer realizes that a husband beating her up every day is abnormal. She just accepts it as part of her daily lives. So in a nutshell, I felt we were suffering from the battered wife syndrome, and that's something that we first and foremost must understand, that we are suffering, that we have a disease that we need to be healed from. And so it's a journey, it's a process of undoing and understanding how did we get to the state of mind that we are today as Black people. It is only when we change the state of mind of the Black person can the status of Black people in general also change. Our status, sadly, it doesn't matter where you encounter us as Black people. We have been so beaten down. We have been so brainwashed. We don't even know what our North is. And so I embarked on a journey to help us Black people find our North.
All right, Ambassador, so before we dwell deep into what exactly happened at the African Union, I just want to ask you as a doctor, I mean, what can you say about the COVID-19? I mean, the whole world is on standstill. Any words to people that still believe that COVID doesn't exist? Or is there anything that you'd want to say about COVID-19?
Well, what I can say is COVID-19 is real. I happen to be someone who has lost a couple of people who were very dear and close to me, and both of them died within a week. From talking to them, they were fine, and then suddenly short of breath and rapidly getting intubated and dying. So COVID is real. For those who choose to say COVID does not exist, let's make no mistake about it. We have science. We can have other conversations as to why COVID is here, but to deny an obvious, it will be foolish. Let's follow the science, and let's make sure that not only do we follow the science from outside. I'm loving what is happening on the continent, where the Africans are also saying we have our own scientists, and our scientists are also doing their research. COVID is real. What I am praying very hard and hoping that we are seeing the most that we are going to see out of Africa. Everybody had been worried about the carnage. We're not out of the woods yet, which is why we want everybody to be vigilant. We want, for us, especially diaspora, we must play our part in joining our brothers and sisters on the continent in fighting this infection. And we must understand that the need is huge. The heads of states have done a tremendous job in protecting our borders, in making sure that in the early stages of the disease, that those who were trying to enter their various countries were screened, those who had symptoms, those who had the disease or had been exposed, they were isolated. They implemented a process of tracking the contacts of those individuals. But the reality is, even the process of tracking the contacts, it requires money. It requires the people themselves to be transported around. And then from identifying them and also testing them, it requires funding to buy those testing equipment, to train the personnel, all the way to those who test positive, those who are symptomatic, taking them to the hospital and treating them. You need personnel, you need equipment, you need healthcare. So we are looking at screening, we are looking at tracking of contacts, we are looking at testing, we are looking at treatment. All those levels, you're talking massive need at every level. So while the governments are doing a good job of containment and prevention, let's also realize that there's a lot more that needs to be done. While we deal with the sick, the exposed, there's still also many who are not yet exposed. We want to make sure they stay free of the disease. So that means prevention also. Everybody must wear a mask. So massive, massive needs for huge amount of money. So if you can donate in whatever way, whatever means is out there, enough money to buy a mask, to fund a mask for a person, you could actually save many lives by simply making sure that every African that needs to wear a mask, particularly those who live in what we call high density areas, it's very difficult to tell a mother who lives in a home, a 2-room house with 10 people, to say socially distance. It's just mission impossible. The containment and preventive measures that work for the West do not necessarily work for too many of our people that are less fortunate in our continent. So we must realize that this time is calling for collaboration. This time is calling for us to say, we have a responsibility as individuals, as those to whom much is given. We have a responsibility to also step up and protect and defend the more vulnerable members of our communities, which is why we're asking everybody to donate, to see what you can do to participate in contributing to fighting this horrible disease. But we're hoping and praying that Africa may not see the peak that the West has seen. And so that is our hope. We keep our fingers crossed and we remain vigilant. And as diaspora, let's commit to supporting our governments in all the efforts that are in the process of implementing.
Absolutely. So, Your Excellency, and then you moved from Tennessee to Washington, D.C. You started discovering a lot. What is that thing, or what is that, I don't know, element that you realized that something is wrong? What was the red alert, red light that you noticed that something is wrong?
Well, I think two levels. From the diaspora end, I traveled extensively around the continent. I mean, rather more extensively around the Americas. I did travel around the Americas, the continent of the Americas, but not as extensively outside the continent. I did travel outside the United States, but extensively within the United States. What struck me the most was after every presentation, the first question, almost 100% of the time, the diaspora were asking, regardless of what I would have spoken about, because I was the representative, obviously I was representing all the heads of states. The first question was, but Ambassador, the African heads of states are all corrupt. And that was such a wrong statement. Yeah. You can't just blanket all African heads of states and call them corrupt. That's not fair. You know, we are just feeding ourselves, or we are regurgitating what the colonizers have programmed us to say. If you want to talk about a particular country, let's pick that country, let's pick that issue within that country. Let's have a meaningful, robust conversation about that issue. But to take one issue that's happening in one country and extrapolate it throughout the whole continent, that is very unfair. It's only furthering the agenda of the master and how he wants to use us as the instrument of our own self-destruction. So I had a problem with that, and I felt it's something that needed to be addressed. And then also, in some cases, I would have talked about an issue that to my surprise, when I spoke, it was like almost 99% of the people had never heard about it. And I'm talking about France, with France taking over $500 billion out of Africa in actual cash by forcing the heads of states to deposit their bank reserves with the French central bank. None of them knew about it. We're talking $500 billion taken by a little bitty country called France. The corruption watchdogs, they tell us that about $50 billion gets out of Africa every year from corruption, from the rich people, from the whoever, all together, put together, 50 billion gets out of Africa. So the question that I had to the diaspora, when they jump up and complain about the corruption in Africa, I get that. I'm not saying let's not go after corruption. I'm simply saying let's put things in perspective. Why is it that there's 1,000% outrage over 50 billion getting out of Africa, and there's zero outrage, even ignorance of the 500 billion getting out of Africa from one little country? That's before all the millions being taken out of Africa by companies doing business in all the former French colonies, all the trillions being taken out of Africa by companies that go back to colonization by Britain, colonization by Italy, by Belgium, by Portugal, so by Germany. So the ignorance was huge. When you take all that collectively into consideration, you are talking trillions getting out of Africa, from safe havens by these companies where they don't pay taxes, to illegal mining, illegal logging, illegal fishing, illegal trade in wild plants and animals. It just is a lot going on. The continent is being exploited, looted in a humongous way. And I realized
But Your Excellency, Your Excellency, and the heads of states are aware of this?
To be honest with you, to some extent, yes, they are. But I'll tell you also, and that was part of the journey, to say that, of course, that will be the next question. So once people, then let me take you through the understanding and how I got to where I was. So I realized that the diaspora are being told one part of the story, to just say the heads of states as if that should end the conversation. So we don't talk about other things that are going on. So I wanted the diaspora to understand that the issues are much bigger. Let's prioritize, let's organize our thinking, let's look at it and say realistically, if we were to take the top 10 issues in Africa, for the purposes of discussion, I would put corruption at number 5. Addressing number 5 alone is not going to give you the solution that you desire. You could change heads of states all you want every day until the other issues, especially item 1 to 4, are addressed. Nothing is going to change, because the environment under which any new leader is coming to work is still very corrupted. The majority of the corruption for Africa coming from outside, which was intentionally laid out for us by those who claimed to have given us independence. Even political independence, we have limited political independence because those who colonized us still have an influence over the outcomes of what happens, the decisions that are made within our continent. Now, to get to your question, to say, what about the leaders? So I wanted to make sure that the diaspora understood that while we have many issues, we can either choose to fight all of them at the same time and lose all of them, or we could be strategic and deliberate and organize our issues and strategically go after what matters most. But more importantly, in order for us to go through this process of dealing with our issues, we must first and foremost understand what is going on. But more importantly, our minds have got to change and understand that we are suffering from the legacy of slavery and colonization. So to go to the issue of the heads of states, if you take the Francophone, like I said, 22 African heads of states have been assassinated, and majority of them, France had something to do with it. When they tried to pull out of the Pact for the Continuation of Colonization, the heads of states were assassinated, or they were exiled. There were coups in those countries. There were instabilities in those countries. It's all documented. It's nothing that I'm making up. You can look it up, you can read it. But what I found out that what I assumed to be obvious, the majority of the diaspora did not understand. So that's why I set out the realities for the heads of states in trying to challenge some of these countries. Sometimes, in some cases, it was death. You know, let's make no mistake about it. It's well documented, and everybody knows that. Even to this day, if a head of state tries to flex their muscles and do what's right, I'm not saying we don't have problems with leadership. Please don't get me wrong. Don't misunderstand me. I'm simply saying, let's understand our problems from the root. Let me use an example of the most recent story of Zambia and a company called Glencore. Glencore is an English company that owns several, that was running 2 or 3 mines in Zambia. They had not been paying taxes for over 20 years. They are using safe havens to hide their monies. They underreport what they're mining. They underreport what they're selling, the price at which they're selling these products for. All the copper goes to Switzerland. And how do you continue to run your business for over 20 years? If you're losing money, how are you staying in business? You know, so when the government finally says, we're tired, we've been trying to work with you, this is an issue that President Lungu acquired, it was already in existence. What does Glencore do? They respond by laying off 11,000 people. So good for him. President Lungu said, fine, get out. I'm giving you 7 days. If you don't return the people to work, if you don't address this issue of paying taxes, there was a tender going out in 7 days, so another company can come in and take over. And there were many companies, from what I hear, that were ready to move in and take over Glencore. But it took the president taking a position to say, if that's the way you're going to be, I'm going to fight fire with fire. Well, you know what? Glencore quickly, they expected the president to curve in, because normally that's what would happen, because the president is looking at 11,000 lives that are being impacted. When those 11,000 lives are impacted, they turn against the president and start blaming the president. So they know the game. But President Lungu said, enough is enough. We have had enough of this abuse in Africa. We have to put an end somewhere. So Glencore quickly recalled the employees to come back to work, and now they are negotiating with their tail between their legs. That's what needs to happen. But it is not easy.
But you see that's one head of state out of 54. What about the other ones? Let's talk about Zimbabwe, where you and I both come from.
Mm-hmm.
With the situation right now, what can you say about the state of Zimbabwe, Your Excellency?
If you look at the situation of Zimbabwe, and that's a very good example of Zimbabwe, why do we have sanctions in Zimbabwe? People say, well, sanctions are not causing this and sanctions are not causing that. There are ramifications. When you look at the ability to borrow money, when you have a country under sanctions, while they may say the sanctions are not affecting this and affecting that, lending institutions, they look at the fact that you are under sanctions and that's it. They don't want to go beyond that. So let's not be foolish. The sanctions are affecting the country in a tremendous way. It affects the country's ability to trade, ability to import the necessary materials to develop the industry. Let's make no mistake about that. Zimbabwe was a beloved country in 1980 because President Mugabe did not implement the Lancaster Agreement, where the land reform was to be held until 10 years later, which was willing buyer, willing seller. So Zimbabwe was heralded as the next breadbasket of Africa until 1990, when the Lancaster Agreement clearly stated that the willing buyer, willing seller land reform program was ending, and that the government was going to begin the implementation of the land reform program, which clearly stated there were 3 letters that were to be issued to the farmers: Section 8, Section 5, and Section 3. First section gave the farmer 3 years. They say, we have identified your land as part of the land reform according to the Lancaster Agreement, which was agreed upon by both parties. So within 3 years, the farmer was supposed to come and negotiate with the government. As a Zimbabwean, regardless of your color, you were, at that time, I believe they were allowed to keep about 900 hectares of land. So you choose which 900 hectares of land you want to keep. And whatever you want to keep, you keep. You have the first right. And then what's left needs to be distributed. 900 hectares, that's a lot of land. That's almost 2,000 acres. Keep in mind, a lot of these farmers were owning 4 or 5 farms. They owned thousands of hectares of land. They were not even farming a single acre. They were using all those thousands of acres of land for hunting. You have Westerners coming in, paying $30,000 US to get a license to hunt one of the big 5s. They were making more money out of hunting, while the majority of the locals, millions, are squattering with nowhere to farm. Keep in mind, we had all been pushed to what they called the reserves, which were the most horrible farming conditions, areas that were infested with mosquitoes and tsetse flies. That was not a condition that could be continued. So when Mugabe started the process of land reform in 1990, then the West turned against him. But the turning against Mugabe started with even the farmers themselves, who did not want to give up the farms. So they used their political connections to begin to create noise from outside. If they had just followed the Lancaster Agreement, which was very clear: 3 years, negotiate with the government, pick up what land you want to keep. Section 5 gave you, I believe it gave you 6 months to still come. If you did not come after the first section, give you 6 months to come and negotiate with the government. Section 3 said, okay, you clearly do not want to negotiate with the government. The reform is going to take place according to the Lancaster Agreement, in which case you are now left with everything now belongs to the state, and you now have access to your homestead, at which point after that, the government has the right to come in and evict you from the property. It's not many. Majority of white farmers in Zimbabwe, they agreed with the program. They stayed. I know many white farmers who have never left Zimbabwe. They are still farming because they understood the importance of doing what is right what is just, what is fair. How can you continue to own all those thousands of hectares of land when millions of Zimbabweans can't even afford a hectare of land that is good land for them to grow their crops? So Zimbabwe's problems started then. And the communication and the dissemination of the story of Zimbabwe, I have to say it wasn't properly handled. The PR job could have been better in explaining to the world that actually there is an agreement called Lancaster Agreement. If you look at the Lancaster Agreement, the government of Zimbabwe followed the agreement to the T. It is the other side, because they did not want to, quote unquote, many, the ones who call themselves Rhodesians, they did not want to listen to a kefir. And that's why they would not follow the Lancaster Agreement. They started playing games and they created a monster that came back to hound them. So the story goes back to then, and the West and those who control who control the world, they have never forgiven Zimbabwe, and Zimbabwe continues to struggle to this day. The sanctions should have been lifted. The sanctions, when I was lobbying for Zimbabwe in Congress, one-on-one, the US members of Congress would tell me that, yeah, you're right. The sanctions against Zimbabwe should not continue. There is absolutely no justification as to why the sanctions would continue. But the real sad part for me, when you would see Zimbabweans coming from Zimbabwe and to the US, lobbying members of Congress and encouraging them to vote for sanctions in Zimbabwe to continue. To me, that is the real sad story of an Africa. So even if you think you want to run the country, how are you going to run the country? Do you know how difficult it is to turn the machinery of undoing a sanction on a country? You know, and besides, are you comfortable with the manner in which your grandmother in the village is living? Are you comfortable with the conditions under which your own relatives are living in the village? That you can fly all the way to Washington and lobby for sanctions to continue against Zimbabwe. That is really sad. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier, to say we are now being used as instruments of our own self-destruction, because to a greater extent, sadly, too many of us are suffering from the legacy of slavery and the legacy of colonization. That is where the conversation needs to begin.
But Your Excellency, I understand when you say that, of course, Zimbabwe is in a very difficult state because of the sanctions. But looking at what you even said about Zambia, look at President Lungu. He did not look at, he considered the citizens first, 11,000 people, he chose them. Do you think President Mnangagwa would do that for Zimbabweans? Because I see a lot of Chinese are coming into Zimbabwe. You spoke about illegal mining. You spoke about a lot of things that we should not even look at. Corruption as the first. There is number 1 to number 4, which I still want you to even address. What is it from number 1 to number 4? But do you think President Mnangagwa is also doing enough to protect Zimbabweans and our minerals in Zimbabwe?
Let me tell you, Zimbabwe has been fighting for quite a while. If you look at when the land reform began, well, let me just say, we have been on the battlefield even before independence. Zimbabwe has been fighting. And then 1990, the fight was of a different nature. The sanctions, the abuses, I don't know if you are familiar with Chitungiza. There was that, I know that particular story very well. Yes. This was a textile mill that employed thousands. Are you familiar with it? In Chitungiza? Yes. That textile mill was closed overnight. Employees went to work the following day and the factory was closed. They moved and went to South Africa without notifying the employees. There was a whole lot of that sabotage. I don't know if you're aware of when a lot of the farmers during the time of land reform, they physically took actual Zim dollars out of the country in suitcases in order to sabotage the government. And the government woke up and there was actually no cash in banks because they had physically taken the cash. People would then go to the banks to try and cash their paychecks. Physically, there was no cash. I don't know if you remember when the President Mugabe then decided, because he knew the game they had played, he decided he was going to change the currency. And he gave all of them 1 month to say, if you have Zim dollars, wherever you are, we are giving you $30 30 days to bring them to the nearest Zimbabwean embassy. Otherwise, your dollars are going to be, your Zim dollars are going to be useless because we are introducing a new currency. That was done in order to address the issue of the actual cash that had been taken out of Zimbabwe by those who chose to.
But how many Zimbabweans know this, Your Excellency? How many Zimbabweans know this? It's not for you that is even talking. There is communication breakdown between the citizens and our leaders.
That's why.
Look, you're only saying it now. I'm only also hearing it now for the first time.
Yes, that's why I'm saying the PR job could have been better by Zimbabwe, but that is what was going on. The sabotage was huge. I can tell you, there were situations where they all networked, the farmers. They had a plan to get rid of as much farming equipment as possible in order to make sure that if these Black people think they can get the farms, we're going to make sure there's no farming equipment in Zimbabwe. So the government had to really also had to go undercover and make sure that they keep up with what items were being imported out of Zimbabwe. They were huge. They were amassing equipment, farming equipment in docks, in plans to moving all the farming equipment. Not all of them, don't get me wrong. A lot of white farmers, they understood the need for them to be with the government because they are Zimbabweans, but a lot of them just could not accept the fact that Black people could rule them. They took out a lot of farm equipment as part of the sabotage. So there was some serious sabotage going on. People simply do not know, which is why I said the PR campaign from the government could have been better. They could have told their story a little better, but there was serious sabotage. And I urge everybody to look at the Lancaster Agreement and you decide for yourself who followed the Lancaster Agreement. The Lancaster Agreement is that document that resulted in the independence for Zimbabwe. But when you look at it, really, if you look at what is happening, just to give you, and this is a little bit of a digression, but just to give you how arrogant these people are. Just this year, I don't know if you saw the article, the British finally agreed to allow us to get the skulls, the remains of our descendants that they took.
Yes. Yes.
Mugabe had been fighting for these skulls to come back since 1980. How stupid can this be? Why should we be reduced to that level? That it takes us this many years, from 1980 to 2020, to simply say, you murdered our people. We want their remains back. We have to take you to court for that? You got to argue. What kind of lawyer goes to court to argue such a stupid case? We should be going to court and charging the British for murder. But we are reduced to begging to get our own ancestors back. Come on now. If we are lucky, maybe we'll get them this year. I need to see young people outraged by that. Where is the outrage? So let's look at our history. Let's understand our history. The facts are all there. Let's refuse to be spoon-fed information when the facts are clear. Tell me why we have to fight for our ancestors, for their skulls. And nobody is being charged.
Your Excellency, that was President Mugabe's fight. So I still take you back to my question. I want you to tell me about.
I'm saying, I need you young people to equally
President
be outraged about that.
Where's
the conversation about it? It's happening now. So it's not Mugabe's fight. It is your fight too, because those are your ancestors. You should be talking about it. You should be looking Britain in the face and saying, why? Why is this happening? Why are you wasting taxpayers' money?
But the thing is, we have a leader. We have a leader who's also running to them to ask for donations.
Again, you have to understand the entire conversation to say, when a country is now brought to the knees, which is where Zimbabwe is, Zimbabwe has been brought down to the knees. I wish you could understand the conditions under which the government is operating. It is a very difficult conditions, and intentionally, the same way they're beating down a black man to make sure that the black man can never go beyond point A, B, C, they're doing the same thing with the countries. Africa is designed to go up to a certain level, and that's it. And we're supposed to accept mediocrity. We're supposed to accept substandard ways of living. What they will not accept in their Western world, we're supposed to accept it. We are part of an agenda. Berlin Conference, and subsequent transition to quote-unquote independence. It's all part of somebody else's agenda. Their own programs. You look at the United Nations. You look at World Health Organization. You look at IMF. You look at World Bank. Their success is based on the failures of developing countries, particularly Africa. We are part of their agenda. Their success depends on our failure. The onus is on you, young people, you, the smart one, to understand what is going on in your Africa. You don't wait. And you started out nicely by saying people don't like to read. Wherein lies our problem? There is a saying that says, if you want to tell people, Black people, anything, put it in a book. They'll never find it because they will not read. The information is right there. You don't need anybody to tell you. My young people, read. Refuse to be spoon-fed. You know the truth. You have continental Africans working in the World Bank. I met a lot of them. They told me what was going on, but they don't speak up. They know the game. Why aren't they speaking up? It is everybody's responsibility. Africa cannot continue to be under siege. You all should know enough. And with your platform, bring those issues. Talk about it. You have a responsibility also to educate. So
yes, Your Excellency, that's why we are here today. So before I get into people's comments, a lot of people sent me, especially women. I have a lot of women that say, I just want to ask you, if would you give him?
You are breaking up, my daughter. Can you repeat the question?
Okay, yeah, I noticed that. So I'm saying, before I dwell into the comments and questions from a lot of women, especially that sent questions for you today, I just want to ask, if you are to be in the same room with President Mnangagwa today, what advice would you give him?
I would not give him any advice, but rather I will quote President JFK. Ask not what your country has done for you, but what you have done for your country. I will look him dead in the face and say, Mr. President, I understand the challenges that you are facing are huge, because I do understand the challenges. What can we do together to make Zimbabwe a better place?
Okay, so there is a lady from, wow, powerful. So there's a lady from Zimbabwe. She is saying that she's been following you a lot. She has listened to you speak. She says that it is time you act, you do something. Enough of the talking. Can you lead us?
There are many who have been asking me to run for chairman of the African Union. I even have some that have come up with proposals about how they're going to fundraise for me to run for the chair of the African Union. But you know what, though? I love grassroots. And like I told you, I am a family physician. I live my life like I did when I was practicing as a family doctor. Mobilization of the grassroots and educating the masses. I feel that my strength is in making sure that when we are awoken as a people, when the young people are awoken, we actually, you can throw us wherever you want to throw us, any boardroom, we can make the right decisions. Where we are failing right now, our boardrooms across the continent are being occupied by people who don't understand the issues, are being occupied by people who are suffering from the legacy of colonization. We need to wake up. The majority of our leaders are from, you can say, ministers, be it CEOs of companies, at every level, leadership at every level. You put them in front of a white person, their knees buckle in. We still feel inferior to white people. All we got to do is stand up and defend our turf. We are coming from the point of righteousness. Our fight, our struggles, our issues are very easy. We simply look at them. I mean, for example, France. I don't have any problems standing in front of President Macron and say, dude, why are you doing this? How do you justify taking this much money out of Africa every year? How do you justify that? How do you go to bed? What little girls in France want is what little girls in Africa want. Why are you stealing from the African children? We need to have that direct conversation. And then collectively, as the 14 countries, they must come together and say, President Macron, the game is up. We are no longer depositing our money. Do whatever you want to do, which is why I'm so proud of the 37 countries that supported President of Madagascar and said, we are taking the COVID-19 cocktail. That is what's needed. What are they going to do? They want to take that patent from Africa, like they always do. And then when that patent goes outside Africa, they put it in a little capsule. Now Africans can't afford the capsule. So what is needed is taking a position as a united African front. I say kudos to those heads of states that stood with the president of Madagascar and said, these are the herbs. You and I don't know where you grew up in Zimbabwe. I grew up in the village where our grandmothers would go into the bush when you are sick, come back with a few herbs, they boil them, and we got better. So we grew up with those herbs. So how dare you tell me that it's not going to work? You know, we have scientists, some of the brightest scientists I know are Africans, even in this United States of America, in Europe. So you can't tell me just because that scientist is doing work in Madagascar is going to do inferior work versus if the same scientist is doing the work abroad. We have some very intelligent scientists who are very capable. We are tired of our intellectual property being stolen from us. So I applaud what is going on when it comes to COVID organic drink, and that the heads of states are saying what is African belongs to the African. It is time for us to make decisions about what goes on in our continent. It's about time that we need to say it is time for Africa. Africa is such a humongous continent. We don't need anybody. We need our own central bank. We need our own stock exchange. We need our own monetary policy. We really don't need the United Nations. If you think about it, why do we go to the United Nations? So they can say Africa was present, check. So they put in their systems to continue to keep us where they want us to be, where they feel we belong. Africa needs to stand up and do what is best for Africa. But for each and every African country to succeed, we have to do it as a continent. We do it in unity. But as individual African countries, we're little boys being thrown into the boxing ring with heavyweights. We will never win. The stressors are too big. The individual African country, you might win some, but there are many other battles that will be thrown to your country that you will never win. That is what I want our young people and Africans to understand, that we are on somebody else's agenda. And until we are now on our own agenda, nothing about our circumstances are going to change. And that agenda that is ours starts with our unity and speaking with one voice.
Okay, so before I talk, I ask you to tell us about what you and I discussed in private the other day. I just want to read this to you from one lady from Zimbabwe. Her name is Kuda. She says, one thing that unifies Africa is her children. We call it our motherland. Therein lies our unifier. Women, as women, we can change Africa and unify it. Can we speak one language that transcends the patriarchal, its mother's love, outside the political world? Don't know if Your Excellency will relate, but I believe she can. Imagine a woman can have 10 kids with different men. She is able to raise these kids as her own and make them have one unity of purpose.
Absolutely. As mothers, you have to understand, as a woman, particularly as Black women, we are truly incredible human beings. I often say to young women that you need to stand up tall, because why? Without you, the Black woman, there would not be any races as we know them. Life as we know it began with the Black woman. And that, for that reason, a Black woman is an exceptional human being who is capable of doing so many different things. And we truly are incredible. It is precisely because of that that African women are survivors. And it's going to take, I think, in my humble opinion, that we begin to have more and more women in leadership roles. I like what President Obama said a couple of months ago, that if the world could allow women to lead for just 2 years, the world will change forever to be a better place. So yes, let's face it, we have the ability, naturally, we are nurturing beings. We are naturally capable of juggling 10 balls at the same time. All we need is an opportunity to be on the table and do the right thing.
Okay, so Your Excellency, we discussed the other day, I already told you that I want to be a part of that great initiative that we discussed. So can you now openly tell us, tell the other women listening to us, of course, and other men as well. I don't want to be gender sensitive. I have to be gender sensitive, but can you take us through that process, what you were telling me the other day about us doing something as women? Could I also hear say that Africa has never been so united like this time? We need to take advantage. Of course, it's said that we have COVID-19, but we have to take advantage of that and be united, and let's ride on this way.
You know, I'm trying to remember what conversation. We spoke about a lot of issues. Can you remind me as to which issue in particular you're talking about?
Okay. So you told me that at least as women, we can join hands, start a fund, about the fund that we're discussing about, and you gave an example. You said even if it's $10, I mean, how many women or how many women are in Africa?
I think what we're looking at from the diaspora end, there's a fund that's being registered where we are talking about pulling all our funds together, and everybody invests in a fund and be a shareholder. And it is it is the fund that's then going to invest in continental development projects. One of the funds is looking at saying the minimum investment is $10,000. So women could go into what we call the isusus. You bring in, if it's 10 people with $1,000, if it's 20 people with 500, if it's 40 with 250, you form your isusu, and on a monthly basis, you could invest into that fund. And it is the fund that can then invest into various projects. I think what is needed is first and foremost organization. Here in the diaspora, we are looking at having ADDI register 1 million diaspora in the next 12 months. When we can then message each other as professionals in the different sectors for the purposes of delivering messages on opportunities and investment programs, and how they can actually even also go to Africa and help in their particular sectors. It becomes easier when we are united and we have a directory of all the diaspora. So what's needed is unity and continued conversations and organizing for the purposes of saying, unless we organize, there's no way we are going to be able to move the needle. Let's learn from the Jews. The Jews are very organized. They can send messages among the 15 million Jews with the push of one button. Let's learn from what the Indian diaspora are doing in this country and even in Europe. Let's learn from the Chinese, from Irish diaspora. Other organizations, other races are organized. We're the only ones who are not organized because we're still suffering to a great extent from the legacy of colonization and self-hate. We don't believe in ourselves, let alone each other. So again, I don't want to overemphasize this point, but the reality is the healing begins with each and every one of us having a serious conversation with the image in the mirror.
So in case other women want to be part of this AFDDI, how do they do it?
You need to go to our ADDI, that's OURADDI.org, OURADDI.org, our ADDI.org, and just sign up. Let us know what your profession is as an individual, as well as a company. If you own a company that is in particular services, sign up under that sector. So once we start blasting out the programs that we're going to be rolling out, we want to make sure we're able to reach you. And also for the purposes of waking up, my book is on standby to be printed. I'm hoping it should be out any day now. It's called Africa 101, the wake-up call. It's simply saying, these are the issues. Understand them for what they are. Because it's only when we wake up that we can begin to make a difference for Africa. Because remember, no amount of education can decolonize you. You go to that boardroom with a colonized mind, garbage in, garbage out. It is really that simple. So we all need to wake up. So go to Africa101.org, Africa101.org, and reserve your copy.
Wow. Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Thank you very much. So is there anything that you'd want to say before we sign off? Any last words to everybody listening to us today?
My last words to the, and I'm sorry, but I am a universal mother. And I enjoy mixing with young people like you. You make me feel 10 years younger. So to all my children in the diaspora and on the continent, I want you to keep the faith. Do not lose hope. We are going through this pandemic. We will prevail. We are currently in the valley, but together we'll make it to the mountaintop. So let's stay strong, let's stay united, let's work hard to decolonize ourselves. Mother Africa needs us. Long, long, long live Africa. Long live Africa's children.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me, and keep up the good work.
Thank you very much.